Seeking to disconnect the design of space from its over-reliance on visual methods and components by replacing the process with a concentrated attempt to represent the artistic, social, and emotional context of a space through aural architecture. Initially attempting to promote inclusivity and accessibility for visually impaired users, this methodology explores the relationship between aural design and the accompanying experience it creates. In forming this methodology, creating a mental representation serves as the visual understanding of a space. However, the space is ultimately understood through the sounds presented. A space is mute without activity. The challenge then becomes, how does one represent space through sound during the design process? Architecture can be designed by defining a space solely through acoustic compositions that evoke an architectural experience. These compositions are produced through activators, combined with material design, acoustic design, and technical effects. The compositions are explorations into spatial relationships, using depth, reverberation, and echo as these qualities define the space, form, and program. Using these tools transforms the design sounds into architectural form. Creating a design methodology for aural architecture begins with understanding how sound and space react to one another. By using this knowledge, a designer can create a composition that can begin to describe the qualities, components, and spatial form of a space. While this creates a mental representation of space, the complete understanding of the architecture can be lost. By using similar techniques for creating space through sound, paired with an understanding of how one moves through a space, a designer can begin to cohesively transition from space to space while implying form. First, one must understand how space is characterized and understood spatially through sound. A space is mute without an activator to accompany it. This activator or activators begins to inform essential qualities of space. The manipulation of these activators begins to reveal the form of the space, the location of the environmental and physical activators in relationship to the individual, as well as the materiality of the space. All of these elements play towards the entire composition of a space. In order to accomplish this classification or personification of space, understanding the technical effects spaces produce on these sounds is vital. While basic acoustic knowledge is needed to understand how space works, one can grasp the basic concepts presented. A sound in a space produces its own unique quality based on that space. By experimenting with dry or original input sounds, the reverberation of that sound, and the length of sound over decay time, one can start to create their own space. However, basic rules of thumb apply to understand certain spaces. For instance, smaller, more confined spaces have shorter decay times, higher dry sounds, and the materiality and shape of the room will determine the reverberation length. In contrast, larger spaces have less dry inputs, a higher reverberation length, also determined by the materiality, and a longer decay time. While this begins to create different spaces, architecture as we know is not just about space, but how one transitions between the spaces. The key for designing in sound then comes down to how sound gets transitioned space to space. Accurately representing this allows for a cohesive understanding of the spaces that builds towards the entire form of the architecture presented. In order to accurately depict the transition between spaces, one must understand how sound changes between the two. An easy approach to transitioning spaces is by producing a doorway that reduces the fading and blending needed for the space. While doorways are easy transitions, not every space is open and shut by a door. In order to express this in the methodology already demonstrated, by designing both spaces and implementing an architectural transition, one can comprehend the architecture. To accomplish this, a space is classified and characterized, and then the sounds that are manipulated to express that space must become manipulated once again. By managing the directionality and the volume of these activator sounds, one can begin to transition the space. The key is making the sounds true to the architecture composed, is by understanding that the sounds presented in space become softer and become characterized by the new space it's becoming occupied. This applies in a similar fashion as the space is being approached instead of leaving a previously occupied space. Ultimately, sound design disconnects designers from their over-reliance on the visuals of designing. While architecture can be analyzed by the sounds produced after being created, Designing in sound begins to address how an experience can be captured without being present. While perspectives in architectural drawings attempt to show the experience, they do not tell the entire story. Not taking away from the impact visuals have on the overall understanding, drawings can be falsified and capture dramatic, unrealistic depictions of what is actually presented. Sound design instantly transports the listener to the space and gives them the actual experience the architecture produces.